5 years had passed since Dr. Lee Hyun's discovery changed the galaxy forever. The ancient conduit network now connected over 200 worlds in an instant transportation system that made old territorial boundaries completely meaningless. Former enemies worked side by side on massive projects that would have been impossible when species were separated by months of dangerous space travel. The new Galactic Council met in a spectacular space station that orbited the binary star system at the galaxy's center. The facility itself demonstrated the power of cooperation, combining human engineering creativity with Altarian construction expertise, Vorthak computational systems, and Zenthari energy manipulation techniques. The result was a structure more beautiful and functional than any single species could have built alone, President Park. So Young now held the title of Secretary General of the reformed Galactic Alliance, had her office in the station's diplomatic sector where she worked alongside beings who had once considered humanity barely intelligent. Admiral Velkorian had become one of humanity's strongest supporters after experiencing their mercy during his defeat at Proxima Centauri. The former Altarian commander now served as head of the Alliance's peacekeeping forces, using his military experience to prevent conflicts before they could escalate into violence. His friendship with Captain Kim Dong-woo had become a symbol of how former enemies could become trusted allies when they shared common goals. Dr. Kim Tae-ri directed the Galactic Science Institute from laboratories that would have seemed like fantasy. Just years earlier, human researchers worked alongside alien colleagues whose different ways of thinking created breakthrough discoveries almost daily. The combination of human intuition, Vorthak computational power, and Zenthari energy sensitivity had revolutionized almost every field of scientific study. The most exciting discoveries came from studying other patterns that the ancient civilization had left scattered throughout the galaxy. Dr. Lee Hyun, now recognized as the scientist whose humble work had started the revolution, continued his research at the main institute facility, where teams from dozens of species collaborated on projects that none could have imagined. Alone Hyun's latest work involved mapping energy signatures that suggested the ancients had developed technologies far beyond simple transportation. The conduit network was apparently just one part of a larger system that included methods for healing damaged planets, extending lifespans across different species, and potentially reaching other galaxies entirely. The Planetary Restoration Project on Kepler Prime showed what cooperation could accomplish. The world had been strip-mined by the Skarn hegemony until its surface was nothing but toxic wasteland and poisoned oceans. But teams combining human creativity, nebular atmospheric processing techniques, and Zenthari biological restoration had transformed the dead planet into a garden world in less than 3 years. Millions of beings from dozens of species now called Kepler Prime, home living in cities designed by collaborative architectural teams that created spaces beautiful enough for crystalline Zenthari, functional enough for multi-armed Vorthaks, and comfortable enough for various biological species. The planet had become a living symbol of what the galaxy could achieve through unity trade. Relationships that had once been based on military advantage or resource exploitation now focused on mutual benefit and shared growth. The Vorthak Collective shared their manufacturing technologies freely while receiving human agricultural techniques that allowed them to grow food in previously impossible environments. The Altarian Republic provided security services in exchange for nebular stellar engineering that extended the lifespans of aging stars. But the most profound changes were not technological. The galaxy had begun to think differently about fundamental questions that had puzzled philosophers for millions of years. Wars that had seemed inevitable based on resource competition became unnecessary when instant transportation made sharing practical territorial disputes lost meaning when borders could be crossed as easily as walking through doorways. Educational exchange programs brought young beings from across the galaxy together to learn in environments that their parents could never have imagined. Students who would have been taught to fear and hate other species instead formed friendships that crossed every biological and cultural boundary imaginable. Dr. Choi Ji-hai now directed the Alliance University. System had established campuses on 50 worlds where curriculum focused on understanding differences rather than exploiting them. Engineering students learned to design for multiple species simultaneously, while philosophy students explored how different forms of consciousness could work together rather than compete. The success of the conduit network had inspired searches for other ancient technologies hidden throughout the galaxy. Archaeological teams combining the pattern recognition, skills of humans with the analytical abilities of other species had begun discovering artifacts that suggested the ancients had solved problems that current civilizations still considered impossible. Evidence suggested that the ancient builders had developed forms of energy that could operate across galactic distances, medical techniques that worked on any form of life, and communication methods that could connect minds directly without technological interfaces. These discoveries hinted at possibilities that made even the conduit network seem primitive by comparison. The Alliance had established strict protocols for studying ancient technology, ensuring that new discoveries would be shared equally among all member species, rather than hoarded by whoever found them first. The lessons learned from humanity's generous approach to the conduits had convinced everyone that cooperation produced better results than competition. Some species still remained outside the Alliance, choosing isolation over integration. The proud hegemony of Zerion refused to abandon their warrior culture, while the mysterious Void Dancers claimed that galactic unity would destroy the diversity that made life interesting. But even these holdouts had ceased aggressive expansion, recognizing that the balance of power had shifted permanently. The network continued growing as more species met the requirements for membership. Each new addition brought fresh perspectives and capabilities that enhanced the abilities of existing members. The galaxy was becoming a single vast organism with billions of specialized parts working toward common goals. Religious and philosophical movements had emerged, celebrating the unity of consciousness across species. Barriers. The Church of Cosmic Connection taught that all intelligent life shared a common spiritual origin, while the Order of Universal Understanding sought to map the deeper patterns that connected minds across biological differences. Art and culture flourished as beings discovered beauty in forms they had never encountered before. Human music combined with Zenthari light sculptures and Vorthak mathematical poetry created new aesthetic experiences that transcended the limitations of any single species' perception. Galleries throughout the network displayed works that could only be fully appreciated by multiple forms of consciousness working together. Dr. Lee Hyun stood in his new laboratory watching human and alien students collaborate on experiments that seemed impossible just years before. The quiet scientist whose discovery had started everything still preferred simple approaches to complex problems. But now his work was supported by resources and partnerships that made anything seem possible. Through the laboratory windows, he could see ships from dozens of worlds arriving and departing through conduit terminals that had become as common as spaceports once were. The galaxy had learned to move at the speed of thought rather than the speed of conventional engines, making distance irrelevant and bringing every world within reach. The revolution that began with one human's refusal to accept limitations had grown into something beyond anyone's wildest dreams. The galaxy had not just gained new technology, it had discovered new ways of thinking about existence itself. The ancient conduit builders would have been proud to see their gift being used not for conquest, but for the growth of wisdom and understanding. As Hyun prepared for another day of discovery, surrounded by colleagues who had once been enemies, he smiled, knowing that the greatest adventures were still ahead. The network connected worlds, but the real breakthrough had been connecting minds across the vast spaces that had once divided species. The galaxy had finally grown up. President Park. So Young authorized Project Breakthrough, exactly 1 week after the humiliating rejection at the Galactic Council. The classified program would develop the ancient conduit technology in complete secrecy, using hidden facilities scattered across the solar system. Far from prying alien eyes, human scientists would prove that creativity could triumph over arrogance. Dr. Kim Tae-ri became the project director working from a converted asteroid mining station in the belt between Mars and Jupiter. The facility looked like any other rock processing plant from the outside, but inside it housed the most advanced laboratories that humanity could build. Teams of engineers, physicists, and mathematicians worked around the clock in shifts that never ended. The aliens' dismissive attitude became humanity's greatest weapon. Galactic monitoring stations tracked human activities but paid no real attention to what they considered primitive industrial operations. The sophisticated surveillance, systems that watched for military buildups or advanced technology development, simply ignored human mining ships and research vessels. While the Altarian Empire constructed massive new battleships and the Vorthak Collective developed weapons that could destroy entire moons, humanity quietly revolutionized the fundamental nature of space travel. The aliens were so convinced of human limitations that they never bothered to look closely at what humans were actually doing. Engineer Park Jun SEO led the team trying to solve the power requirements for activating the ancient conduits. The alien approach would have been to build enormous fusion reactors or tap into the energy of entire stars, but Park studied how the ancients had worked with natural cosmic forces instead of fighting against them. The breakthrough came when Park realized that the conduits did not need massive amounts of raw energy. Instead, they needed precise control over existing cosmic currents that flowed through space, like invisible rivers. The ancients had built their network to ride these currents rather than overpower them. This elegant solution used less energy than a typical alien starship burned during a single hyperspace. Jump Dr. Lee. So Jin tackled the navigation algorithms that would allow safe travel through the conduit network. The alien method involved complex calculations performed by quantum computers that required enormous processing power. But So Jin approached the problem like solving puzzles rather than crunching numbers. She discovered that the ancient navigation system worked more like intuition than calculation. The conduits responded to intention and understanding rather than brute computational force. Human minds that had evolved to recognize patterns and make intuitive leaps were actually better suited for this task than alien artificial intelligence systems. The first major test took place on a cold Tuesday morning when the research team attempted to transport a simple metal probe from Earth orbit to Mars. The probe was nothing special, just a basic device filled with instruments and cameras that would record the journey. Nobody knew if it would arrive intact or arrive at all. Dr. Kim Tae-ri stood in the control room surrounded by jury-rigged equipment and hand-built monitoring systems. The technology looked primitive compared to alien starships, but it represented years of human ingenuity and determination. The countdown began with nervous technicians, checking their instruments one final time. The probe vanished from Earth orbit in a flash of blue light that lasted less than a second. The monitoring stations immediately began searching for any trace of what had happened while the Mars receiving station prepared to detect the probe's arrival. Seconds ticked by with no signal from either location. Then the Mars station erupted in celebration. The probe had appeared in perfect condition, exactly where the calculations predicted. The journey that normally took months using conventional propulsion had happened instantly. The probe sent back clear images and data showing that it had suffered no damage during transport through the conduit, but the most amazing discovery was the energy consumption. The entire transport process had used less power than the aliens burned to heat their ships during a typical day in space. The ancient technology was not just faster than current methods. It was thousands of times more efficient. Word of the successful. Tests spread through the secret project teams like wildfire within hours. Scientists who had worked for years on theoretical problems suddenly saw practical applications. Engineers who had struggled with impossible power requirements realized they were thinking about the problem. Wrong Dr. Yang Min Ho began designing larger conduits that could transport entire spacecraft instead of small probes. His team discovered that the ancient builders had created different sizes of conduits for different purposes. Small ones for messages and supplies, medium ones for individual ships, and massive ones that could move entire fleets across the galaxy. The mathematics were beautiful in their simplicity. Once humans stopped trying to force the technology to work like alien machines and started understanding how the ancients had actually designed it, everything fell into place. The conduit network was not a weapon or a tool for conquest. It was a gift designed to connect civilizations and promote. Cooperation Professor Choi Ji-hae made another crucial discovery while studying the conduit activation sequences. The ancient builders had included safety protocols that prevented the network from being used for destructive purposes. Ships carrying weapons of mass destruction simply could not use the conduits, and any attempt to transport dangerous materials would result in the conduits shutting down automatically. This revelation changed everything about humanity's approach to the technology. The ancients had built their network to encourage peaceful exploration and scientific cooperation rather than military expansion. The conduits worked best when used by species that valued knowledge and understanding over conquest and domination. Human psychology seemed perfectly matched to the ancient builders' intentions. Humans had always been explorers and inventors driven by curiosity rather than pure ambition for power. While alien civilizations had spent millennia perfecting weapons and conquering territory, humans had focused on understanding the universe and finding their place within it. Dr. Kim Tae-ri realized that this compatibility was not accidental. The ancient builders had designed their technology to work with minds that approached problems the way humans did. The conduits required creativity, flexibility, and the ability to think beyond established patterns. Exactly the traits that alien civilizations had dismissed as primitive weaknesses. 6 months after the first successful test project breakthrough had mapped dozens of conduit routes and successfully transported everything from individual components to complete spacecraft. The human teams had learned to navigate the network with an instinctive understanding that amazed even themselves. The secret project had grown beyond anyone's wildest expectations. Hidden facilities throughout the solar system were building conduit activators and navigation equipment. Small teams of human operators learned to pilot ships through the ancient network with skills that alien quantum computers could not match. President Park received daily reports showing progress that exceeded all projections. The conduit network was not just functional, it was ready for operational. Humanity had gone from dismissed primitives to masters of technology that made alien starships obsolete, and the galaxy had no idea what was coming. The revolution was about to begin. The encrypted message from Europa reached Earth 3 days later, traveling through the standard communication relays that connected human colonies across the solar system. Dr. Lee Hyun's discovery data filled dozens of files with energy signatures, star charts, and mathematical proofs that would change everything. President Park. So Young read the report in her private office while morning sunlight streamed through the windows of the global government building. Park had been expecting something like this for months. Intelligence reports suggested that several alien races were planning to restrict human expansion even further. The Galactic Council had been discussing new laws that would limit human mining rights and force them to work only in the most dangerous asteroid fields. Park knew that humanity needed leverage, something to prove they deserved respect rather than pity. The ancient conduit network was exactly what humanity needed. Park immediately classified Hyun's discovery at the highest security level and called an emergency meeting with her top advisors. Within hours, the best minds on Earth were studying the data, trying to understand its full implications. Dr. Kim Tae-ri, head of the Space Research Division, confirmed that the patterns were real and the technology was functional, but Park knew that convincing the Galactic Council would be nearly impossible. The alien races had spent centuries building their reputation as the masters of science and technology. They would never accept that primitive humans had discovered something they had missed. Ambassador Chen Wei-ho, who had served as Earth's representative to the Council for 5 years, warned that the aliens would probably laugh at any human scientific claims. Park decided to try anyway. 2 weeks later, Ambassador Chen stood before the full Galactic Council in the massive chamber on Nexus Prime. The council building was designed to intimidate with soaring ceilings and holographic displays that showed the military might of various alien empires. Representatives from dozens of species sat in curved rows, looking down at the small human delegation like judges at a trial. Chen began his presentation by showing Hyun's energy signature maps and explaining the mathematical patterns that revealed the ancient network. The human delegation had prepared for months, creating simple visual displays that even the most arrogant aliens could understand. They showed how the conduits could revolutionize galactic travel and communication, making the current system of slow interstellar flights obsolete. The reaction was immediate and brutal. High Commander Veltharion of the Altarian Empire stood up before Chen could finish speaking. His tall blue form radiated contempt as he addressed the chamber in his booming voice that echoed off the crystal walls. The Altarians had conquered more star systems than any other race, and Veltharion had personally led campaigns that destroyed entire civilizations. Impossible, the High Commander declared. These human scribbles are the desperate fantasies of an inferior species. If such technology existed, we would have found it millennia ago. The Altarians have explored this galaxy longer than humans have existed as a species. Our scientists have studied every corner of known space with instruments these primitives could never build or understand. Chief Scientist Mor Quintex of the Vorthak Collective agreed with a series of clicking sounds that translated as dismissive laughter. The Vorthaks had multiple arms that could operate dozens of instruments simultaneously, and their computer-enhanced brains could process information faster than any biological mind. Their technology was so advanced that they considered most other species barely intelligent. Humans lack the mental capacity for true scientific discovery. Mor Quintex announced to the chamber, the Vorthak have been studying cosmic energy patterns since before Earth developed complex life. We have quantum computers that can map entire star systems in seconds. If this ancient network existed, our machines would have detected it long ago. The fact that humans claim to have found it with primitive equipment proves it is nothing but wishful thinking. The other council members murmured agreement among themselves. The proud Zenthari, with their crystalline bodies that could process light directly into knowledge, spoke of how humans had always been slow learners who needed simple tasks, explained multiple times. The gas-dwelling Nebular Collective mentioned that human brains were too small and too slow to comprehend advanced physics. Representative after representative stood up to explain why humans could not possibly have made a genuine scientific discovery. Some suggested that the humans had misunderstood natural phenomena and created an elaborate fantasy to make themselves feel important. Others proposed that this was a crude attempt to gain attention and sympathy. From more advanced races, Ambassador Chen tried to present more evidence, but the council had already made up their collective mind. The vote was swift and unanimous. The human claims would be dismissed without further investigation. The official record would note that Class C species sometimes developed delusions of grandeur when they felt threatened by their obvious limitations. Chen and his delegation returned to Earth with the bitter taste of defeat, but President Park had expected this outcome. She knew that alien arrogance would blind them to human achievements. The same superiority complex that made them dismiss human potential would also make them ignore human activities. Park saw this as an opportunity rather than a setback. Meanwhile, Captain Kim Dong-woo of the Earth Defense Force was not surprised by the Council's reaction. He had served in joint military operations with alien forces and had seen their weaknesses firsthand. The aliens possessed powerful weapons and faster ships, but they followed rigid protocols that made them predictable in combat situations. Captain Kim had noticed that alien commanders relied too heavily on their advanced technology and forgot the importance of creative tactics. When unexpected situations arose, they often froze while trying to calculate the proper response according to their military doctrines. Human commanders were trained to adapt and improvise, using whatever resources were available. The alien races had grown lazy over millions of years of technological advancement. They built bigger weapons instead of better strategies. They created more complex machines instead of elegant solutions. Their success had made them arrogant, and their arrogance had made them blind to possibilities. That did not fit their established patterns. Back on Earth, brilliant scientists like engineer Yang Min-ho and physicist Dr. Choi Ji-hai began studying Hyun's data with fresh eyes. They realized that humans, despite their primitive technology, had unique advantages that alien races had lost over time. Human creativity, willingness to take risks, and ability to think outside established patterns made them perfect for understanding ancient technology, while aliens built massive machines that required enormous resources. Humans were used to finding simple solutions, hiding in plain sight. The ancient builders had used elegant principles that worked with natural forces rather than against them. This approach matched human thinking patterns much better than alien brute force methods. Dr. Choi discovered that human intuition was actually better suited for understanding the ancient conduits than alien quantum computers. The network required a different kind of intelligence, one that could see connections across vast scales of time and space. Human minds that had evolved to find patterns in chaos were naturally equipped for this challenge. President Park smiled as she read the latest reports from her science teams. The Galactic Council had made a critical mistake by dismissing human capabilities so completely. Their contempt would become humanity's greatest advantage. While the aliens continued to ignore human activities, humanity would quietly revolutionize space travel itself. Dr. Lee Hyun stared at his computer screen for the 100th time that day. The numbers dancing across the monitor made no sense to anyone else, but to him they were starting to tell a story. He rubbed his tired eyes and took another sip of his cold coffee. The small laboratory on Europa Mining Station felt more like a storage closet than a proper research facility. Around him, boxes of old equipment and spare parts created narrow walkways between his desk and the single window that looked out into the black void of space. Jupiter hung in the distance like a giant orange marble striped with swirling clouds. The other scientists on the station often joked that Hyun had the worst office in the galaxy, but he did not mind the isolation. The rest of the galaxy saw humans as barely intelligent creatures who had somehow stumbled into space travel by pure luck. The Galactic Council had given humanity a Class C rating, which meant they were smart enough to follow simple instructions, but not much else. Most alien races treated humans like useful pets who could dig in mines and carry heavy things, but could never understand real science. The Altarian Empire, with their tall blue bodies and glowing eyes, considered themselves the masters of military strategy. They had conquered dozens of star systems using massive fleets and superior firepower. The Vorthak Collective, with their multiple arms and computer-enhanced brains, believed they were the greatest scientists in the galaxy. They could build machines that humans could barely understand, let alone operate. But Hyun had noticed something that all these advanced alien races had missed completely. For months, he had been collecting data from space debris that floated through the outer solar system. Most of it was junk from old mining operations or broken pieces of asteroids that had collided with each other. Everyone else threw this data away because it seemed totally random and worthless. Hyun was different, though. He liked patterns and puzzles more than fancy equipment. While other scientists used quantum computers that cost more than entire space stations, Hyun preferred to work with simple mathematics and hand-drawn charts. His colleagues thought he was wasting time. But Hyun believed that sometimes the most important discoveries came from looking at things that everyone else ignored. The energy readings from the debris showed strange signatures that did not match any known technology. The patterns were too complex to be natural, but too old to be from any current civilization. Hyun had spent countless hours mapping these signatures, trying to find connections between different pieces of debris scattered across light years of space. His small quarters, next to the laboratory, were filled with papers covered in equations and diagrams. The cleaning robots had given up trying to organize his mess months ago. Hyun lived on instant noodles and coffee, sleeping only a few hours each night when exhaustion finally forced him to rest. His supervisor, Dr. Park, had stopped checking on his progress because the work seemed to lead nowhere. But tonight, something was different. As Hyun plotted the latest batch of energy readings on his hand-drawn star chart, he saw a connection that made his heart race. The seemingly random pattern was not random at all. It was part of something much bigger, much older, much more advanced than anything the current galactic civilizations had ever built. The debris was not just space junk. It contained traces of technology from an ancient civilization that had disappeared millions of years ago. These ancients had built something incredible across vast distances of space, something that connected star systems in ways that modern science thought impossible. Hyun stood up so quickly that he knocked over his coffee cup. The brown liquid spread across his papers, but he did not care. His hands shook as he traced the pattern with his finger, following the energy signatures. Like breadcrumbs in a fairy tale story, each piece of debris marked a point in a network that spanned half the galaxy. The ancient builders had created conduits that could move matter and energy instantly across space, while current civilizations struggled to travel faster than light using massive engines and enormous amounts of fuel. These ancients had found a way to work with space itself. They had discovered how to fold distance like paper, bringing distant stars close enough to touch Hyun. Realized he was looking at the remains of a transportation system that could revolutionize galactic travel. The Altarians, with all their military might, still needed months to move their fleets between star systems. The Vorthak, with all their advanced computers, had never solved the problem of instant communication across the galaxy. But this ancient network could do both instantly. The young scientist sat back down and stared at his discovery. The pattern was so elegant, so simple, once you knew what to look for. The ancients had not used brute force or massive machinery like modern civilizations. Instead, they had found natural pathways through space-time itself, threading their conduits through cosmic currents that already existed, but there was more. Hyun realized that the network was still partially active. Hidden under layers of cosmic dust and debris, the ancient conduits were waiting to be reactivated. The energy signatures he had been tracking were not just echoes of the past. They were the heartbeat of a sleeping giant as dawn broke over Europa, casting long shadows across the ice-covered surface. Hyun finally understood why no one else had found this network. The alien races were too proud, too convinced of their own superiority, to look at humble space debris. They built bigger and more complex machines, but they had lost the ability to see simple, elegant solutions. Humans were different. Humans were used to being underestimated, used to making do with less, used to finding creative solutions when they lacked the resources for brute force approaches. While aliens followed rigid scientific protocols, humans were willing to try crazy ideas and think outside established patterns. Yun saved his data and encrypted his files. He knew that once this discovery reached Earth, everything would change. The galaxy had underestimated humanity for too long, treating them like primitive creatures who could never achieve true greatness. But this ancient network would prove that intelligence came in many forms, and that sometimes the greatest discoveries were made not by the strongest or most advanced, but by those humble enough to see what others had missed. He looked out at Jupiter one more time, knowing that his quiet life as an unknown researcher was about to end. The pattern was complete. The network was mapped, the revolution was about to begin, and it would all start with one human who refused to believe that bigger always meant better. News of the Altarian defeat spread across the galaxy, faster than even the most advanced communication networks could carry it. Every species that had dismissed humanity as primitive minors suddenly found themselves scrambling to understand what had really happened in the Proxima Centauri system. The impossible victory challenged everything. They thought they knew about technological development, and military power chief scientist Moore Quintex of the Vorthak Collective called an emergency session of their highest research council. The computer-enhanced beings who had mocked human intelligence just months earlier now desperately wanted to examine whatever technology had made such instant space travel possible. Their quantum computers worked around the clock analyzing battle recordings, trying to understand how human ships had moved like ghosts. The Vorthak immediately offered massive trade deals for access to the human transportation system. They proposed to exchange their most advanced weapons manufacturing techniques and even territorial rights in exchange for even basic information about the conduit network. The same beings who had called humans mentally inferior now spoke of partnership and mutual scientific cooperation, but the Vorthaks were not alone in their sudden change of attitude. Representatives from dozens of alien civilizations arrived at Earth within weeks, each carrying increasingly generous offers for human technology. The proud Zenthari, who had claimed human brains were too small for complex thinking, now wanted to establish permanent scientific exchange programs. The Nebular Collective, whose gas-dwelling forms had called humans slow and primitive, suddenly discovered deep respect for human innovation. They offered to share their stellar engineering techniques that could rebuild dying stars in exchange for transportation technology that could connect their scattered population across the galaxy. Even former enemies sought human friendship. Skarn hegemony that had raided human cargo ships for decades sent ambassadors with formal apologies and requests for non-aggression treaties. The spider-like beings who had considered humans nothing more than convenient prey now spoke of cosmic brotherhood and shared destiny among intelligent species. President Park. So Young received these delegations in the newly expanded diplomatic facilities on Earth, but humanity's response surprised everyone. Instead of becoming another conquering empire that hoarded advanced technology for military advantage, humanity offered to share the ancient conduit network freely with all species that met certain conditions. The terms were simple but revolutionary. Any race that wanted access to the transportation network had to renounce territorial expansion through military conquest, treat all other species as equal partners in galactic civilization, and contribute resources toward peaceful exploration rather than weapons development. Many alien leaders were outraged by these demands. High Commander Vel Tharian, who had barely recovered from the humiliation of his fleet's defeat, declared the human conditions an insult to Altarian honor. The idea that a Class C species could dictate terms to their superiors was unthinkable. The Altarian Empire had built their reputation on military conquest, and they would not abandon their expansion just to gain access to human technology. But ordinary Altarian citizens were tired of endless wars that consumed resources and lives while bringing little benefit to anyone except military commanders. Protests erupted on Altarian worlds as people demanded that their leaders accept human terms and end the cycle of aggression that had defined their civilization. for millennia. Similar upheavals occurred throughout the galaxy, as populations realized that the human offer represented a chance to escape the constant threat of war. The ancient pattern of conquest and resistance had trapped civilizations in cycles of violence that prevented real progress toward understanding the universe. Dr. Yoon Soo Bin, who had become Earth's chief science diplomat, explained humanity's philosophy to the reformed Galactic Council that met in emergency session. The chamber that had once echoed with dismissive laughter now listened carefully to every word spoken by human representatives. We learned this technology by thinking differently, Dr. Yoon told the assembled alien delegates, not by being stronger or more aggressive. The ancients who built these conduits understood that cooperation creates more lasting achievements than competition destroys. That is why their civilization lasted millions of years, while warrior empires rise and fall within thousands. The transformation was not immediate or universal. Some races refused human terms and attempted to steal the conduit technology through espionage, industrial sabotage, or direct military action. But these efforts failed repeatedly because the ancient systems required specific mental approaches that could not be faked or programmed. The conduits responded to operators who genuinely believed in peaceful cooperation and refused to function for those motivated by conquest or domination. Alien agents who tried to activate the network found that the system simply would not work for them, no matter how perfectly they copied human procedures. Meanwhile, human-trained operators from allied species discovered that they could use the conduits successfully once. They adopted the philosophical approaches that made the technology function. The network was not just a transportation system, it was a test of civilizational maturity that separated those ready for galactic unity from those still trapped in primitive thinking. The Altarian Empire split into 3 factions as the population demanded change. Progressive Altarians led by Admiral Vel Korian, who had experienced human mercy during his defeat, argued for accepting human terms and joining the new Galactic. Community conservative forces loyal to High Commander Veltharion prepared for continued military resistance. The third faction, calling themselves the New Altarian Republic, chose a middle path. They would not join the conduit network immediately, but would cease aggressive expansion and focus on internal development until their society was ready for the cooperation that the ancient technology demanded. Throughout the galaxy, similar divisions emerged as species grappled with choices that would determine their futures. The old patterns of conquest and submission were breaking down, replaced by new possibilities that most civilizations had never seriously considered. The Vorthak Collective discovered that their computer-enhanced intelligence actually hindered their ability to understand conduit technology. The ancient systems required intuitive thinking and emotional understanding rather than pure computational power. For the first time in their history, the Vorthaks began studying philosophy and art alongside science. Younger generations across the galaxy embraced human ideals with enthusiasm that often alarmed their elders. Students on dozens of worlds organized exchange programs with human colonies eager to learn the thinking patterns that made conduit operation possible. Universities that had taught military science for centuries began offering courses in cooperation theory and peaceful conflict resolution. The galaxy was discovering that advancement was not just about building bigger weapons or more complex machines. True progress required wisdom to use technology responsibly and maturity to choose cooperation over conquest. The humans had not just shared advanced technology, they had offered a new way of thinking about civilization itself. 5 months after the Proxima Centauri battle, more than 30 species had joined the conduit network, creating an alliance based on shared values rather than military necessity. Trade flowed freely between former enemies. while joint research projects tackled challenges that no single species could solve alone. But the most important change was not economic or scientific. The galaxy had begun to mature, growing beyond the adolescent phase of constant warfare toward something resembling wisdom. Humanity had not conquered their way to leadership. They had earned it by proving that strength came from lifting others up rather than tearing them down. The revolution was far from complete, and many challenges remained. But the direction was clear. The age of endless galactic warfare was ending, replaced by an era of cooperation that the ancient conduit builders had dreamed of millions of years ago. Admiral Vel Korian of the Altarian Empire arrived at the Proxima Centauri system with the largest battle fleet ever assembled for a simple relocation operation. 47 massive warships hung in space like metal mountains, each one capable of destroying entire cities. The admiral stood on the bridge of his flagship watching the human mining colonies through the main view screen with obvious contempt. The Galactic Council had finally approved the Altarian request to claim the Proxima system. For military expansion, the small human colonies scattered across 3 planets would be relocated to less desirable systems where they could continue their simple mining work without interfering with important Altarian strategic plans. Vel Korian expected no resistance. The human settlements had no significant defenses, no military fleet, and no hope of standing against Altarian firepower. Intelligence reports showed that the colonies were inhabited mostly by miners, their families, and a few scientists studying the local star. The total human population was less than 50,000 people. The admiral had brought enough ships to conquer an entire star system because the High Command wanted to make an example. The other Class C species needed to understand that resistance to Altarian expansion was futile. Better to overwhelm the humans completely than risk any embarrassing delays or casualties. Captain Kim Dong-woo stood in the command center of Mining Station Alpha, watching the Altarian fleet deploy into attack formation. His small defense force consisted of 12 modified cargo ships that had been secretly equipped with conduit navigation systems. None of the human vessels looked like proper warships, and none carried the massive weapons that Altarian commanders would recognize as threats. The human colonies had been preparing for this moment for months. Ever since Project Breakthrough proved that the conduit network was operational, President Park had known that testing would come sooner rather than later. The Altarian Empire was expanding aggressively and human territory was directly in their path. Kim had served with Altarian forces during joint operations against pirate fleets, and he understood their tactical thinking perfectly. The aliens relied on overwhelming firepower and rigid formations that had worked successfully for thousands of years. Their commanders followed established protocols that left no room for improvisation or creative responses. But humans had learned to fight differently. During the early years of space expansion, when human colonies were attacked by raiders and hostile aliens, they had developed tactics based on speed, creativity, and precise strikes rather than brute force. Human military doctrine emphasized mobility and flexibility over raw destructive power. The Altarian fleet moved into final attack position with the mechanical precision of a well-oiled machine. Each ship took its assigned place in a formation designed to maximize firepower coverage while protecting the larger vessels from surprise attacks. The formation had been tested in hundreds of battles and never failed to achieve victory. Admiral Vel Korian opened communication channels to the human colonies, using the standard surrender demands that had been refined through countless military campaigns. The message was broadcast on all frequencies, ensuring that every human in the system would hear their fate being decided by superior alien intelligence. Attention. Human settlements, the Admiral announced in his deep, commanding voice that had intimidated dozens of species before. By order of the Galactic Council and the Altarian High Command, you will evacuate these planets within 72 hours. Transport. Ships will arrive to relocate you to approved mining systems. Any resistance will be met with immediate destruction. Captain Kim waited for the broadcast to end before responding. He knew that every word of this conversation would be recorded and transmitted throughout the galaxy. What happened next would determine whether humanity remained a dismissed Class C species or became something that demanded respect. The human colonies respectfully decline your relocation order, Kim replied using the calm, professional tone that had served him well during diplomatic missions. We claim these systems under established mining rights and request that your fleet withdraw to avoid unnecessary conflict. The Altarian bridge erupted in laughter. Admiral Vel Corian could hardly believe that these primitive humans were attempting to negotiate with a superior military force. The idea that miners and scientists could resist a proper battle fleet was so absurd that several officers began placing bets on how quickly the humans would surrender once the bombardment began. Very well, Admiral Vel Corian declared, "Your resistance has been noted and rejected. Altarian forces will now commence planetary bombardment. You have brought this destruction upon yourselves through your foolish defiance." The massive Altarian guns began charging their weapons systems, sending energy readings across the spectrum that would be visible to monitoring stations throughout the galaxy. The sight of 47 warships preparing to fire in unison was designed to break enemy morale and force immediate surrender. But as the alien weapons reached full charge, something impossible happened. The 12 human ships simply vanished. One moment they were scattered around, the system in defensive positions, and the next moment they had disappeared completely. Vel Corian's sensors detected nothing. No energy signatures, no debris, no trace of their escape route. The Admiral assumed the humans had activated some kind of crude stealth technology that would hide them for a few minutes before power limitations forced them to decloak. Altarian sensors were the most advanced in the galaxy, and no known stealth system could fool them for long. Vel Corian ordered his ships to begin wide-spectrum scanning to locate the missing human vessels. Then something happened that shattered every assumption about human capabilities. The missing ships appeared behind the Altarian fleet, having somehow traveled instantly from the inner system to positions that should have taken hours to reach, using conventional propulsion. The human vessels emerged from empty space like ghosts, materializing from another dimension. Captain Kim had used the conduit network to redeploy his entire force in seconds rather than hours. While the Altarians were focused on their bombardment formation, the human ships had slipped through ancient pathways that connected different regions of the star system. The aliens had no idea that such technology even existed. The human attack was unlike anything Admiral Vel Corian had ever experienced. Instead of trying to match Altarian firepower, the smaller ships struck with surgical precision targeting critical systems rather than attempting to destroy heavily armored hulls. Human weapons were designed to disable rather than annihilate. Within minutes, half the Altarian fleet was drifting helplessly in space. Their engines disabled their weapons offline and their life support systems barely functional. The human ships moved like phantoms, appearing and disappearing at will, while delivering precisely targeted strikes that left alien crews alive but completely helpless. Admiral Vel Corian found his own flagship dead in space with all major systems offline. His crew was unharmed but trapped light years from the nearest Altarian base. The mighty warship that had conquered dozens of worlds was now little more than an expensive piece of space junk. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as news broadcasts showed Altarian vessels helplessly drifting, while human ships moved between them like caretakers checking on patients. The humans offered medical assistance to disabled alien crews and provided emergency supplies to ships whose life support systems had been damaged. For the first time in galactic history, the primitive humans had defeated a major alien power using superior technology and tactics. The Class C species that everyone had dismissed as barely intelligent. Miners had made the most advanced military force in the galaxy look like amateurs, Captain Kim broadcast his final message to Admiral Velkorian and the watching galaxy with quiet dignity that made his words even more powerful. The human colonies remain under human control. Your crews will be provided with repairs and supplies for the journey home. We hope this demonstration encourages more peaceful approaches to territorial disputes. The revolution had begun, and nothing would ever be the same.